welcome back to Teaching Through the Bible as we begin the book of Leviticus. So Leviticus, it's a difficult book. A lot of people avoid it. Just avoid the whole book entirely. If you do have anyone preach on it in a church, you probably just have maybe Leviticus 16, which is admittedly, that's a high point. You don't want to skip that one, but there's so much more to that, to all of Leviticus. And so we are going to look through all that chapter by chapter, beginning in chapter 1. But before we start that next lesson, we're just going to give a big overview of Leviticus as a whole. Now, we want this big view so then we can make sense of what we see when we get to those individual chapters and the individual things that are in there. What's going on in Leviticus? Well, if you recall from the last lesson, we had the end of Exodus. And the end of Exodus, what happened? In chapter 40, at the very end, the cloud covered the tabernacle, and Moses could not enter it. So it was great. It covered it. God was accepting their work, what they had done, but now Moses can't go in. It actually says that Moses was not able to enter the tent of meeting because the cloud settled on it and the glory of Yahweh filled the tabernacle. So there's a problem. They need a mediator. They need someone to represent them before God. Now Moses will continue to do this in many ways throughout the next books of the Bible, but there is a sense in where he's not going to be able to do that job as it regards the tabernacle. They need the sacrificial system. They need the priests. None of that is in place yet. And so that's where Leviticus comes in. And in fact, it's actually, you could think of Leviticus as a series of, you could say instruction manuals, really. You have instructions for sacrifice at the temple. That's like the first 10 chapters. Now, a lot of that has to do with the actual sacrifices themselves, and then the last few chapters have to do with the priests. And, they got to have priests in order to have priests sacrificing for them. And then you have cleanliness. It's not, when we think of that, we probably think germs. We want to be clean for, don't want to get sick, that kind of stuff. This is a ritual cleanliness. It's different, and we'll get into that when we get to those chapters. That's going to be chapters 11 through 15. There's an instruction manual for that. Then you have chapter 16, which is kind of the center of the book, kind of a focal point, very, very important. All of it is important, and this is, you could maybe say, a high point here. If someone talks to you about something in Leviticus, it's probably from chapter 16, if it's anything specific. And there's instructions for that, followed by instructions for holiness. And that's a large chunk, chapters 17 through 26. You have this large chunk that is instructions for holiness. What's going to be holy and what's going to be common or unclean. Then you have the funding for the temple at the very end, the last chapter, which, you have all this stuff about the tabernacle, about God's dwelling here, about how you have that relation with him, and at the end, this practical, here's how we're going to fund that, and, the tabernacle now, the temple, is coming down the road after, many, many, many years with King Solomon, so hundreds of years later. So then, what's the main thing? All right, so you've got all these instruction manuals, but why? Well, the question that Leviticus is answering, it has to do with what do we see at the end of Exodus. So how can a holy God be with an unholy people? And the answer to that is that to be with God, our separation from sin and separation to God is necessary. Now, in order to really understand this, we need to know, what does it even mean to be holy? So I've used that word a lot of times already. And in fact, Leviticus will use that a lot, and many, many times. So we got to know what the word holy means in order to understand what's going on in Leviticus and to understand the main point and how this is solved, how there's a problem and how it's solved. Holiness, you could think of it kind of as two sides of the same coin. So you could either think of it as a separation. You're separate and special and different. you're holy, you're separated from everything else, or you could think of it as a full commitment to something, right? So if you are separated from sin, separated to God, so fully committed to God. So it's, on the one hand, it's about what you are dividing yourself away from, and on the other hand, it's about what you are committing yourself to. So God is holy. He is separate from sin. There's no sin in him, never has been, never will be, and he cannot have sin around him. We, unfortunately, are not like that. And so he needs to be separate from us. But he's also the God who's promised to be with us. And so we need a solution to that. Of course, that solution is Jesus dying on behalf of us for our sins. And so that's how he's able to be with us, because that punishment has been wiped away. He sees us, if we are followers of God, if we have trusted in Jesus as the one who's taken that penalty away for the sins, he sees us as he sees himself. He sees us as holy, right? Or you could say God the Father sees us as he sees God the Son, Jesus, that second person of the Trinity. And so he sees us as not having sin. Now, of course, that doesn't mean that he intellectually doesn't know that we had sinned, but the way he sees us, we've been justified. So that's how we can be separated from sin, that's through Jesus, and separated to God. So we can be fully devoted to God. Separation and devotion, that's what holiness is about. And so, how can a God who's separate from sin be with sinful people? Well, in order to be with him, we have to be separated from sin, and we have to be devoted to God. And Leviticus gives us so many examples pointing to Jesus, so many illustrations in real life for how they're doing these sacrifices, all pointing us to Jesus, because he's the answer to that, ultimately. Not everyone understood that at the time. Some people thought, you know what, we can just have sacrifices. And the sacrifices, these animals, they're going to make us right with God. But in the book of Hebrews, you go to the New Testament, and if you weren't already clear that that wasn't good enough, Hebrews straight up says it's not good enough. And why it's not good enough is because it never was good enough. Back in Leviticus, when they're doing this right now in Leviticus, as we read through Leviticus, it's not good enough. But it points to the one who is good enough, being Jesus. And Hebrews spells that out crystal clear. There's really no way around it. Leviticus is giving this stuff to point towards Jesus, not because this in and of itself makes them right with God. If they sacrifice, and God actually says, even in places in the Old Testament, where they're sacrificing, but their hearts aren't right with God, they're not in a good relationship with him, he says, don't even worry about giving sacrifices. It's not even going to do anything anyways. That's not the issue. Right? And so it's not that they shouldn't have sacrificed. It's that, well, even when you're sacrificing, you're not doing it with the right heart. You're not doing it to follow God. You're just doing it because you're just like, I guess I got to do the sacrifice thing so that I can, get a checkbox as far as dealing with this sin or that sin or whatever. They didn't get it. They didn't understand what the purpose was. So here we're certainly going to be looking at it and pointing to Jesus, seeing how it does do that. But that's kind of a big overview of Leviticus. You got to understand holiness, what our problem is, and then you'll see how this can point us to the solution. Now, it oftentimes, even as I've read through Leviticus, I can get really confused where I'm reading the beginning of the chapter and I get to the end and I'm just like, what did I just read? Can I have the Cliff Notes version? Even if it's not a ton of reading, I'm not saying if I read all of Leviticus, but even just reading a chapter or two, it can just get kind of all mixed up in there. Wait, this sacrifice had this thing and this one had that. No, it was the other way around. Wait, wait, which is the sin offering and which is the guilt offering, and wait, what's the process for this thing or that? There's so many of these details that just you might like bullet points. I have something kind of like that. For now, if just email me, I can send it to you. It's kind of like bullet points, and it's kind of like simplifies. You got like, here's what you just read, and here we go. Like, it just thins it out, so you just like bullet point, bullet point, bullet point. It makes sense. So at least that has helped me as I try to clarify what's going on, and I'm trying to look back and say, wait, what did I just read? What just happened? It's no replacement for the Bible. There's a reason that God wrote it this way. There's a reason that things are summed up in the way they are, or not chosen to be summed up. There's a reason why things are that way, and this is God's inspired word. Doing kind of a Cliff Notes version is not the Bible. It's not a replacement. But it can be helpful as a tool to help kind of get some clarity about what's going on. So feel free to ask for that, and I can send that to you. My email will be in the description below. So that about wraps it up for the summary, the kind of the big picture of Leviticus. Just a reminder, we are still in the law. We're still learning about the covenant. The Israelites have finally, in the book of Exodus, they finally did make that covenant with God. There's all of this, you may say prologue before, there's all of this about, in the covenant, about what God did for them before he even got to the point of this covenant with the nation. The nation didn't even exist as a nation back in Genesis, but even before they were a nation themselves, God was already doing things for them, was already blessing them, and was already working towards what we get to in Exodus. And so he makes a covenant with them, and here is kind of part of that covenant in Leviticus. We're right now going to be in the middle book. We have Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. So we're in the middle book of those five. And it's going to be really important throughout the rest of the Bible. And the more you understand this, the more you will understand a lot of other things when the Bible refers to sacrifices or when there's references to this sort of thing. So this will be really important for a number of reasons. And next time we'll start just with chapter 1 with the first of the offerings, the whole burnt offering. Thank you for watching that video. I hope that it helped you learn a little bit more about the Bible today. And if you'd like to continue to learn more about the Bible, then we have plenty of other videos on the channel. And if this has been helpful for you, then you can always let me know by subscribing to the channel. And hopefully I'll be able to continue to help you learn even more about God's Word. Thanks.